there's a lot of fans out there, and your content is what they're going to come for. You can have a bad microphone, but if you're putting out interesting, well-researched, quality content that will make them want to listen, will actually compensate for maybe you don't have the best mic yet or the best camera yet or whatever.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Welcome back to the podcast on podcasting. And I'm your host, Adam A. Adams. I'm joined today with none other than the host of the Fallible Man podcast, Building Better Men. And I think that this podcast is also great for women too. Like, I think that all of the content literally can benefit anyone, especially if you're a parent. But I think it's interesting because some of the topics that he shares on the podcast, the discussions that he has on his show, are discussions that I think many men tend to avoid, and probably including myself. So, a warm welcome to our show, David Dowlen. How are you, man?
Man, thanks for having me on, Adam. I'm psyched to be here. I'm good. Life is busy as always as an indie podcaster, as you know. I'm either recording or producing something at the moment usually. So I appreciate the time out to just come on and be on the show and share with your listeners today.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you the question that I ask every single guest. Why is there a lion behind you?
A lion behind me? Oh, yeah. A lion behind me.
Yeah, why is there a lion?
It really just matched my taste in art. My wife brought that home one day, and I love lions because I like lions and I like sharks. And I like them both because they don't have to tell anybody who they are. They are, right? Every animal on the African savanna knows, oh, that's a lion, right? And the lion stays in its lane and everybody else stays in its lane. And it just does what it does unapologetically, like a shark. It swims around the ocean and it's a shark unapologetically, right? I think so often we are afraid to offend people that sometimes we just stop living the life we're supposed to live and spend all our time worrying about pissing somebody off. Now, obviously, there are situations where society dictates certain behaviors, right? And I don't want to actively offend somebody, but I also don't want to worry about offending somebody just because I'm me. And my wife came home with that one day, and the artwork is just beautiful to me. And so, yeah, I made it into my office.
Well, I don't ask all the guests that. They would be confused because they're like looking behind them. There's a lion behind me. Oh, crap. All right. Well, let me ask you this. Can you give us just like your journey into starting the Fallible Man podcast, like why you started it, like what you were kind of going through, the pros and cons? Just if you could sum it up in just like a minute or two, where you are today, where you came from, and then we'll just kind of jump into the other questions.
Absolutely. The Fallible Man podcast is a result of just being surrounded by women my whole life. I have 9 nieces. I have 2 daughters. I have 4 or 5 sister-in-laws. And, one of my sister-in-laws is going to hear this and be pissed that I missed them. But I've been surrounded by female friends. I've always got along with women better my whole life. And I've listened to women, both adult women, and I used to be a youth minister, so teenage women, frustrated with the men in their lives. And I'd explain things to them over conversations. They'd be like, man, you really got a grip on this. You should share that knowledge. And so I started writing a book, and I thought, hey, if I'm going to self-publish a book, I should build an audience. Started social media. I hate social media. And I thought, you know what? Podcast is a better platform for me because I've grown up speaking, and I'm very comfortable in that medium. And 15 months later, here I am.
Will mention one thing. Have you done your book?
No, I've got about 7 chapters into it. And cool. I'm not sure I like the 7 chapters I've even written yet. So.
I've got a connection, and this goes for anybody listening too. But I've got this connection. He's just a really cool guy. And his team, they take your podcast. So you don't have to really necessarily write your own book. It's kind of like ghostwriting, but they take your podcast content and they turn that into a book for you. So it's kind of cool. If you're interested, just hit me up. I'll connect you with them.
That's a good idea.
I have put off a couple of books, and this is going to be probably the easiest way for me to write my book. I'm like, just listen to these episodes, take the content from there, and I'll fill in the blanks when necessary, or I'll clarify. Anyway, back into a question that I've never asked any guest, but I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be interesting. And David, I really am curious. I haven't done this with any other guests yet. So you'll be the first one. And there's a few topics that I hear like on different forums. I'll see it like on social media or whatever. And people argue about some of this stuff. And I'm just curious what you think. You're a little over 70 episodes into your podcast, I think 15-ish months into your journey. Will you rate a few things for me, 1 to 10?
Yeah, let's get into it, man.
First, how about like your microphone quality? I hear a lot of people specifically saying that don't worry about the mic quality, like your listener will be totally fine just with good content or whatever. So what is your thoughts? Like, where would you put that? 1 to 10, mic quality?
I'm going to have to put a microphone at 9 or even 10, but I'm going to do it because of this, because there's more to that question, right? Everybody knows who gets into podcasting, the Shure SM7B, right? That's the granddaddy of amazing microphones.
Yeah.
But like on my podcast journey, the microphone I'm using right now, I've had it for a long time, but I actually switched to a shotgun mic because my first couple episodes were really cold. Like I was really awkward staying this close to a microphone, and I lost part of me in that. And so it didn't come across. So I started out with a higher grade, or I should say mid-grade shotgun microphone, because then something wasn't in my face and I felt like I could move a little more and be animated. And that actually made me a lot more comfortable. So I had to get a good microphone that would pick up the sound, because sound quality is super important. But I also had to find and become familiar with a microphone that fit my personality, especially since I record video as well. Because like my first episodes were like, this is the Fallible man. I was scared to move, and I'm a talker. I talk with my hands and I move when I talk. I stand up for my podcast because if I sit down, I feel like I'm kind of frozen in place. So having a microphone.
I love that. I love that.
You want a good quality. You don't have to go like, this is $100 microphone. If you can see it, this is the Rodecaster Pro, or sorry, the Pod Mic. This is the Rodecaster Pod Mic. And it's a really great $100 microphone. It's got good quality sound. But when I first got it, I just couldn't stay this close and in frame. And so it wasn't giving me the sound quality I need, because you need a decent sound quality. So your microphone is important for two reasons. You need that sound quality, but you also really need something that's going to fit you personally.
Awesome. A lot of good info in that. Thank you. How about the actual content that you are producing? How important is that to a new podcaster?
I think that's definitely at least a 9, probably the 10, because let's face it, right? There are a lot of people who have there's a lot of fans out there, and your content is what they're going to come for. You can have a bad microphone. You can have, not the perfect video shot, but if you're putting out interesting, well-researched, quality content that gives something to your viewer, right, or to your listener, if they're getting something out of that. I have a friend who podcasts and their mic quality is not very good, but their content is just really, really solid. And so I keep listening regardless of, it may not be the best sound quality, because I care about what they're talking about. And so making sure that your content you're putting out just quality for your audience. And you have to know who your audience is, but making sure that's quality content that will make them want to listen will actually compensate for maybe you don't have the best mic yet or the best camera yet or whatever.
How about like having an entertaining podcast? For example, the energy level that you bring, the jokes that you have, the banter that's there, or like the stories that you share. How important is entertaining the guest, keeping them alive or whatever?
That's complicated, because that's like slightly relative depending on your taste, right? I have one podcast I listen to is very, what's the right word? Sterile almost, like very factual, medical kind of content, right? And I mean, you get the best stand-up comedian in the world, and unless you're interested in it, it can't be entertaining, right? It puts most people to sleep. So it's a little bit relative, but your content has to be interesting and engaging to your ideal listeners, right? I'm not a funny guy. So if I start cracking jokes through my podcast, my listeners are going to tell that's unauthentic for me because I'm not good at it. Sarcastic, sure. Funny, comedian, oh God, no. That's, I'm the epitome of a dad joke.
Okay. How about, let's fly through the next few. Okay. Wearing headphones?
I'm going to give that a 9 or a 10 for sure. Because you got to be able to hear what's going on without having to deal with the blast back. Now, you don't have to have the top end headphones, right? You don't have to have a $200 pair of headphones. These are $19 in-ear headphones.
Yeah, you can hardly even see yours, which is awesome. I love it. Yeah. Drop me a link to the ones that you're wearing. I want to add it to my website, actually. I'm going to add it to my website, the exact ones that you're wearing. Since you love your pod mic as well from Rode, I'll add that to the website. It's going to be growyourshow.com/PDF. And I need to say one thing about that website, webpage, growyourshow.com/PDF. You can either ask for the PDF by giving the email, or don't worry, you could just scroll down. You don't need a PDF. And there's hyperlinks to everything. We try to make some of those so we make revenue through the podcast. When you go, you don't pay any extra, but we might make a few cents or whatever. But I love the headphones that you're wearing. And I think, not to be sexist or genderist, because I know that's generally inappropriate. So I'm about to make a blanket statement that is going to put everybody's going to hate me. But I think a lot of women would especially love headphones like that, because a lot of my podcast clients come to me and they hate they're like, can't I wear something that you don't see? And so I might be speculating and I might be making a broad statement that offends a lot of people. That wasn't my intention, but I assume that a lot of people, any gender, would love those, but especially my personal clients that are women need those because they've already
from a female streamer.
Oh, okay.
I got turned on. These was a female streamer.
I certainly hope that I don't get hate mail
because I do live shows as well on camera. I have the big over the head clamshell, but because I do live shows, I like the fact that you can't hardly see these.
I need these next 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
To be like crazy fast. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
How important is it for a podcaster to also have video?
2.
If you have only a 2, by the way, that's what he said. If you have video incorporated in your podcast, how important is your background?
Maybe a 3.
If you have a video podcast, how important is the lighting?
That's at least a 7.
Awesome. If you have video, how important is your webcam, the quality of the camera that you're using?
I will say that starts with a 3 and grows to an 8 or 9, depending on where you're going.
Okay. So here's what I'm hearing. If you're not repurposing the video, I might be putting words in your mouth, David. If you're not repurposing the video as much or focusing on the video as your more exclusive piece, you're sitting around a 3. You just need to be able to see yourself.
Yes.
Or have your guests see you. But if you're using that and repurposing it, it gets a lot more important. Now it's becoming like an 8+. Is that right?
Absolutely. The more you focus on video, obviously you have to raise it to a higher level.
Cool.
But let's grow with it too.
Yeah, love that. What about like recording in an appropriate space or a quiet space? I'm thinking about kids, cars, cats. I'm thinking about reverb. How important is like the space that you record in?
Audio wise, it's easily a 7 or an 8.
Okay.
The only thing I can't control in my studio is occasional car going by because I'm front facing on my house and I have a window that's covered, but it only kills out so much sound. But I mean, I put down carpet. I have sound absorbing panels on the other side of the camera that you can't see and a blanket stretched across the ceiling because my kids are homeschooling in the next room right now with video homeschooling.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to that first question of quality mic. This is a group of audiophiles you are trying to interact with. Sound is very important to them. So if you got a lot of background noise, you've got a lot of stuff overlaying that, it will turn people off before they have a chance to even hear what you're saying. So I think it's really important to have that. Whether you got to go in like a closet and put a blanket over your head with your microphone for your audio, that's fine. but having that clean, crisp audio where people can understand you without distraction is, I think, very important. I think that's easily at least an 8 or 9.
How about how important is it to have good theme music for your podcast?
I'm going to say that's in a 4 or a 5, because I think having theme music really depends on what genre of podcast you're into. I've heard some podcasts that have almost no intro at all. I've also heard some podcasts that have amazing intros. And so I think it's going to appeal more to the genre you're in if there's kind of that expectation. If you're introducing your podcast well, then it could be, do I really need this or not?
How about like when we're thinking about our guests? I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you about selecting guests. Do you have guests on yours? I've been on your show, so I know you have had at least one guest. When getting guests, how important is it that that guest is, we'll say, famous?
I don't think it's important. I'm going to say that's like a 1 easily.
Okay. How about qualifying the credibility of the guest, making sure you're not having like the wrong person, the type of person that would hurt your audience, or like how important is it to qualify that the guest you have is there for the right reasons, for example?
I think that's definitely probably an 8, maybe a 9. I hate to use 10 very often, but I've turned down guests. I haven't turned down a great deal of them because most of them do the research on the show, but I had turned down guests because I just could not. I ask questions before the shows with my guest, before we even like get on a camera. I'm asking questions to qualify. It's like, are you going to bring something of value to my audience, right? Can they connect with you? Can they relate to you? Or are you just promoting yourself? Because I have no problem promoting quality guests, but I'm not just there to sell you if you have nothing of value to bring my audience.
Okay. Next question for you, Mr. David, is how about marketing your show? How important is it to like focus on you doing the marketing and growth of the show and not letting somebody else like it happen just organically? What do you think there?
I think it's really important. I think that's easily at least an 8, right?
Okay.
Because if you're not marketing your show yourself, no one's going to believe in your show if you're not believing in your show enough to put it out there, right? If your people, whether you have a social media account or something else, don't know you're doing a podcast, obviously you don't believe in what you're doing. So that kind of just kills your audience there. And it also kills any growth you have. So I think you need to be out sharing this with your family, with your friends, everybody in your social group, on your social media presences. I think if you aren't tooting your own horn, no one's going to care.
Okay. You mentioned social media, and I actually had a specific question. I wanted you to talk about just social media. Is that pretty much the same answer? Is it like when you were thinking of marketing, you were thinking like on your own platforms? Is that kind of right?
That's definitely the way I approached it.
Okay. Got it. That's good enough then. Now, let's move into some other stuff. David, before we got started today, there was a few things that you and I mentioned. For example, Podfade, what realistic expectations we should have, imposter syndrome, where we might be able to focus as a podcaster, and like kind of, I would want to find out from you what comes first. These are some of the things that your heart was telling you before we even started recording that you wanted to pour into a new podcast listener. So I want to do that. First, we have a quick word from our sponsor, so we'll be right back. Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, growyourshow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show. And we're back with Mr. David Dowlen. We just have a couple of rapid fire questions that I think he's really going to be able to support you with. Number one, what do you think of Podfade? Why did you bring that up, and how can you help a new podcaster not experience that?
Well, Podfade I brought up because right now there's supposedly about 2 million podcasts in the world, right? But I can tell you a lot of those aren't active. They're on the books, but they aren't necessarily active on a regular basis. And it's because a lot of people, they get that inspirational moment, right? And they finally, I'm going to pull the trigger. And they start doing it, but they never got past the first 2 or 3 weeks in their head. They had a couple really great ideas to start out with, but then they get into doing this as a routine. And a lot of people, it was a passionate moment when they started, but then they start to fade out because they're like, oh, we're 5 shows, 6 shows into it. What do I talk about now? Or I don't, even more so, I think realistically, a lot of people have that, oh, well, I don't have a lot of downloads, so obviously I'm not very interesting, right? That's our first response is we don't see just crazy Cannonball Express in every situation. And some people do, and that's amazing. But if you don't, it's really easy to start second guessing yourself. And you're like, oh, does anyone really want to listen to me? I mean, I'm just me, right? So then we're like, and we start backing off and we start struggling for things we're passionate about talking about. And I think a lot of pod fade comes from you didn't think through it first, all as far as you probably should have, right? When I started, I already had 25 things written down. My first 25 shows, before I ever started recording, I had just sat there and I gone to like answerthepublic.com and researched my particular industry and just listed out the first 25. These are the things that matter to me. And that helped me have a base when I got a couple weeks into it to go, oh, then I can, this is my next show. This is my next show. And the same time, while I had those already written and planned out and ready, that gave me a cushion to start building my next shows. I think a lot of people just, they get discouraged and back off before they ever actually truly give themselves a chance to share their messages with the world. And it's just easy to get overwhelmed.
I really appreciate you going into that really resonating with me. Some of what you just shared is connected in many ways to setting the expectations ahead of time. What is there that you can think of that can support somebody in being able to set those expectations kind of like ahead of time so that they don't pod fade?
I think, so there's some really strong communities for podcasters, both on like Facebook actually has a lot of podcaster communities on it. But what really surprised me was Twitter actually has a lot of, I'm not a big Twitter user, but I become more of a Twitter user because I found a really large podcasting community on Twitter. And so being able to communicate with those people and bounce ideas off them helps. I also got involved with a group called Pod Sound School on Facebook. They have a YouTube channel and a podcast. They're a couple that work together on podcasting. And I got a lot of great information from their stuff to help me start my show, but also to help me manage those expectations, right? They have already had together statistics on that stuff.
I want to find out, before we start a podcast, 95%, that is not actual number. This is a guess. Okay. This is one of those made up statistics, but I'm going to pretend this is a fact. 95%, 95.6%, even though it's not true, percent of us feel imposter syndrome before we start a podcast. In many cases, it holds us back from even having one.
100%.
A lot of clients come to me and they ask me when they're going to get over imposter syndrome. So here's what I want to ask you, David. When did you get over imposter syndrome completely?
That's a really fair question. And I think the answer is probably disappointing me because I can tell you 15 months into it, I'm not. I've published 72 episodes. I've got another, 7 recorded on top of that. And I'm booked into next year for my guest. I do a live stream every Monday night on YouTube and Facebook. I have other videos on YouTube. And I honestly got to say, every time I turn on the mic and the camera, there's this momentary, like, just knot in my stomach and my chest gets a little tight. It's like, but you're just Harry. Are you a Harry Potter fan, right? When he's told he's a wizard, right? But I'm just Harry. And that is how I feel like every time I turn on the mic and get ready to tee up a show is, but I'm just David. Why would anybody listen to me? I play egotistical with my friends. All my friends will tell you I have an ego. But realistically, like, I'm a very quiet, introverted person, honestly. And I have people who call bullshit on that. But
I'm not so introverted, David, but I get imposter syndrome every episode also. And so I think, and we're, I don't know, 200 episodes in now, coming up upon that number when this one goes live. So yeah, I am really glad that you, just like you do on your show, like you could be vulnerable with us, because it is so true that it just doesn't really go away, even though 95.6% made up number of us feel it before we start. 100% of us never really lose that. It gets a little better. It gets a little bit more manageable, but we don't lose it, I don't think.
I think the reason it gets better, oddly, is because the reason you get imposter syndrome changes. I think at first you get imposter syndrome because you're like, why would anybody listen to me? I think after you've been doing it a while, part of the imposter syndrome comes from, I care about my audience and I don't want to ever deceive them. I want to make sure I'm giving them quality. And so we start worrying if we're enough for our audience as they are, right? Yeah. Because we come from a place of wanting to provide them content, this quality. So I think it changes why. I just think it's still there.
David, I want to say thank you for pouring into the listener. I want to say thank you for being on the show and giving us your time. And I appreciate you for being honest, vulnerable, and trying something new, since this was the first episode that I did the rate these things 1 to 10. You mentioned a couple of resources. For example, that answerthepublic.com can be a really great place for us to be able to build our content for our listener. And that Twitter can be a really good place for us to connect with other podcasters. And so that was really valuable as well. We're at a hard stop, so I want to say thank you, and I cannot wait for this episode to go live. Bye for now.
Thanks, Adam.
You know, I really don't say this nearly enough. I don't mention this, and I feel horrible because it's a great resource for you to be able to take your podcast to the next level. And it's simply a free resource that I don't need your email or anything. It's just a podcasting course that I created that is ended up putting in the very first 6 episodes of this podcast. So if you haven't checked it out, definitely going to want to just check out those first 6 episodes, see how they can help you improve your podcast, get in front of more people, and have a better result where you're making more money through the podcast, etc. So much can happen after you listen through episodes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if you haven't done it, go do it now. And by the way, if you're subscribed, you'll keep hearing more great content. So to those of you who are, I'll see you on the next episode.